Morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on creating your own training on EOSC, which is the day 4 of the series this week. So in this session, we're going to be recapping some key points on training design and pedagogy. And we'll also look at some training resources that you can reuse and think about how you can make your own resources reusable for sharing within the EOSC ecosystem. So my name's Helen Clare. I'm from JISC in the UK, and I'm part of Work Package 9 of EOSC Future. And my colleagues who you've been with this week are also helping out today, so you can see on the slide. So as we said earlier, this is day 4 of a series of modules. So well done to those of you who've been here all week. We'll be finding out who has in a moment. If you have missed any of the previous sessions, don't worry, they are all being recorded and the resources will be made available. But essentially today we'll provide some time for you to think about your own training and what you plan to deliver. So allowing you to bring together and apply the knowledge from the previous sessions throughout the week. In terms of our objectives for the day, we want you to be able to confidently use training resources relating to EOSC, to be able to create your own resources using those and share any resources that you have created. And we'll also be giving you an understanding of and how to implement FAIR in terms of training materials. I'm sure many of you are familiar with FAIR data, but we'll be looking at applying the FAIR principles to learning resources. So our detailed program looks like this. We're going to aim to keep to the times, but obviously we do want to allow some flexibility if we have certain areas of interest in some other areas rather than others. And as with other days, we've got questions and activities for you. So we're making it really interactive, but please do ask any questions or give any comments in the chat as we go through. We know we're all trainers here today, so it's really useful to learn from each other. A brief background, although if you've been here all week, you'll know this quite well by now. EOSC Future is one of the EOSC projects. It's one of the flagship projects to build the infrastructure for EOSC. So it's creating the technical platform, the system of systems that will allow EOSC to create an environment for researchers to access open and fair data, resources and services in all academic disciplines. And as part of EOSC Future, the activity is structured around different pillars of activity. So it's not just about the technical infrastructure, it's about the policy environment. And it's also about the skills and training, which is where our work comes in Work Package 9. So this is part of our work, and we hope to get feedback from you later on about how you have found this week. But before we move further into the content for today, I'd just like to get some information from you. So please bear with us with the first question, which should be appearing on your Menti fairly shortly. And if I think Pascal has just copied the link into the chat. We'd just like to hear some information about the sector that you're from. So if you can please just list which sector you're from. If there's any problems, please do type in the chat so we can address that. I'm not getting anything coming through yet. I'll reload. Are there any issues? Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Could you advance to the next slide, Helen? Because right now we're still seeing the QR code.
Oh.
Yes, it's. Are you sharing your PowerPoint? Because I can see
yeah, sorry,
reactions coming in. So that's the Menti is there. So it's just a matter of what we're seeing.
Yeah, sorry. It's just. Can you see that now?
Yeah, you're a little bit behind for some reason, but
yes, I do seem to be behind.
Yeah.
Maybe you should share, Pascal.
I can share. Yeah.
If your network's a bit faster.
Yeah. I don't know why that's happening, but I can share because I can see.
Okay, I'll hand over to you if that's okay, Pascal.
Yes. Let's see. Okay, can you see that slide all right?
Yeah, great.
So we're seeing where you see just the 17 scientific person. Right.
Yep, okay, that's great. So shall we move on to, and as usual, if you can just pop in the chat what the other is. Hopefully you can bear with us on this because as trainers, you know how important it is to get evidence of impact and reach in terms of the training that you're delivering.
I have one other answer, and that is management.
Management, great.
Something.
Thank you very much. And shall we move on to the second question, which is...
Okay, yes.
Yeah. So we've got a bit of a mix. So a lot of you have been here for most of the days. So that's really the key point that I wanted to know is who's been here for which days. So we can just build on the previous days. I'll give that a little bit longer. It doesn't seem to be changing. Okay. Okay, I think that's it for now. Great, thanks, Pascal. And I'll go back to sharing. Right, okay, so that's useful to know, as I say, because today is going to build on the previous sessions this week. And what I want to do in the first part of the day, as I said, is just to recap some of the key points from the pre-reading, which gave an introduction to pedagogy and teaching theory and also training design. In this session, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we assume you're trainers and you're familiar with some of these ideas, but it is useful to get a reminder of good practice every now and then. And also we have provided some resources for you to use if you don't have something like that already in place. So in terms of the approach that we take in the pre-reading, or there was a video and some documentation that was actually produced as part of the EOSC Synergy project, which is a previous EOSC project that's just finished at the end of October. We focused on creating online content and good practice around that. So the model we used for training there is the ADDIE model, which is a very, very common training framework used. And essentially, it just outlines the steps to go through in each while you're developing training, starting with analysis and design, development, implementation, and evaluation. Often with this model, you see evaluation as part of the outer circle, but occasionally you will see it with evaluation at the core, which is the model I prefer because I think evaluation happens throughout the whole process. But one of the key points here is that not to start at the development stage. Quite often people just start creating materials and don't necessarily think through what it is they're trying to do, who the audience is, etc. So it's really important to think about the analysis stage, what is it you're trying to do, and then the design stage, how you actually design your training to achieve those objectives. So in the pre-reading, we did give you links to forms, which you may want to use if you don't have anything like that, which, as I say, guides you through the analysis stage and the design. So a brief recap on some key ideas about pedagogy and teaching. Now, we introduced Bloom's cognitive domain, which is, again, very commonly used. The key points here are when you're delivering teaching or training, there are different levels of knowledge, and each one builds on the next, leading to higher order thinking. So at the bottom, we have perhaps the remembering, just repetition of facts, through to understanding, applying, and then up to the top where we have high order thinking and evaluation and creating your own knowledge. It doesn't necessarily mean that knowledge at the bottom is any worse. You need a good foundation of knowledge to remember before you can build on those levels. A key point in this slide here is that this diagram assigns verbs to each level. So when you're creating your learning outcomes, which are what you want your learners to achieve at the start of your course, you can use the appropriate verbs to reach those outcomes when you're designing your activities. Nope, wrong way. And in terms of your design, as I say, the first thing that you'll do is set some kind of learning outcome, a goal to achieve in your training. And your training design then pulls together the activities or the scaffold that you want to use to get your learners to that point. And you might find that your learners need more support and more guidance from the trainer at the start, but hopefully by the end, they can do things themselves and they'll take the knowledge and the skills that they've learned and apply them in their own situations. But the two key points to remember are that the activities should match the intended outcomes. So if you want somebody to actually be evaluating and creating, then you need to design the right sort of activity. It's no good designing something that will just focus on simply remembering facts. But also we want our learners to be engaged and we want it to feel like it's relevant. So you do need to think about how you can design those aspects into your training as well. So those are the key points from the video. If you haven't seen the video, please do recommend it. It's in the pre-reading on the wiki. So one of the main activities for this session is for you to think about your own courses, what you want to achieve, your audience, your learning outcomes, and which activities you might use. But before we have that activity, we'd like to introduce you to some work that we've done within EOSC Future. That we hope you'll find useful when thinking about your own courses. And I'm going to hand over to Irina to explain about our learning paths. If you just want to give me a shout when you want the slides moved on, Irina, I think.
Thanks a lot, Helen. Hello, everyone. So in EOSC Future, we are targeting the following actors: EOSC users or consumers, providers, intermediaries, trainers, and we try to describe them, for example, trainers as facilitators, enablers, accelerators, specialists, providers, similarly, and there might be trainers among providers. And if you could please go to the next slide. We got aspiration from a report, Digital Skills on Fair and Open Science, which was released in 21, which suggested a set of EOSC skills profiles and learning paths. So we analyzed those profiles and we came up with a list that you can see on the slide, which starts with EOSC, EOSC institutional facilitator, resource provider, user trainer, research practitioner, citizen science practitioner, accelerator. And I dropped a link in the chat where you can see a full list and some more information about those profiles. And if you could please go to the next slide, Helen. So this is an example of research practitioner and resource provider learning paths. So for example, if we look at the EOSC research practitioner, we identified that practitioner as a researcher who makes the use of EOSC services and resources in their research. And then this pathway is designed to equip researchers with the knowledge to understand the structure of EOSC, understand and use EOSC portal, design and execute workflows, understand ethical and legal issues. Similarly for providers, so we define a provider as someone who is providing services or content resources to EOSC and contribute to developing EOSC. And then this pathway is designed to guide providers through the onboarding process with the knowledge to handle services, understand the EOSC interoperability framework, understand how to make the services and data fair, create efficient documentation. And then on the next slide, there are two learning paths that would be useful for you because you're trainers. So one of them, EOSC institutional facilitator, and these are individuals who encourage and promote the use of EOSC among institutional staff. And we identify them as librarians, data stewards, research support staff, institutional managers, policymakers, and this pathway is designed to help them explain EOSC better, understand EOSC better, encourage institutions to integrate EOS services. And we also have a specific learning path for trainers. And you can see here list of actions that you've probably seen already a number of times in today's course, because that's what we are trying to do to help trainers get some more skills in training about EOSC. And the idea is that EOSC Knowledge Hub will be structured based on those learning paths. And for example, if someone wants to be a more efficient trainer, then the person will take an EOSC Future course, an EOSC Synergy course, and then in the end will get a specialization or set of pages as a person having his skills and being a user trainer. So that's a short introduction, and we'll have a chance to discuss it in the breakout.
Great, thanks, Irina. If you have any questions or comments, please do pop them in the chat. And what we've got scheduled now is for some time to work in breakouts, partly work in breakouts, partly work individually, to actually reflect on this week and think about what you might do after today. So we'd like you to spend some time. We're going to put you in breakout rooms, and you can work with your colleagues in the breakout rooms, discuss what your plans are, but also spend some time individually looking at the learning paths and then thinking about what it is you would like to do after this week. So ideally, we'd like you to think about a topic or a short description of what you'll do after this week, whether it's a full course on EOSC that you plan to deliver, or whether you plan to integrate this into an existing course. It'd be really useful to hear about your plans, think about which audience you're aiming at, and think about the learning outcomes. So the learning paths that we've created should hopefully be really useful here. And if you get through all of that in your 15 or 20 minutes, think about which training resources from this week you might want to use. So your trainers will give you further instructions and links to notes document when you move into your rooms, but I think we're about to assign you automatically and hope that it'll all work. I think that might be everyone now. What I'd like to do just for a few minutes before we have a short break is just to see if we get some feedback from the trainers from each breakout room about whether there were any common approaches emerging or any comments on resources that might be used. Do any of our training facilitators want to volunteer?
I can start maybe very briefly. So we had nice about so a common thing. I thought people were starting to or planning to incorporate EOSC in more general training, but also we said that maybe once more and more services are known about EOSC and more materials become available, which of course will be the case in the coming year, probably it might become bigger and bigger. And I think in general, the people found, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the people found materials useful and from this week, but also from specifically now in the breakout rooms. So.
Great. Any other trainers want to, or anybody in general want to just?
I can go next. So we started talking about integrating EOSC parts in courses for master students, and the challenge is that usually you have a couple of hours, and you also need to make it interactive and engaging. And there was a question, what kind of games or interactive things we can use, knowing that we're pressed for time, and also they're master students, so they are researchers, but they are not kind of very skilled researchers. So it would be great to have some interactive exercises and activities for this intermediary level as well. And then Lottie shared that she was inspired by Militsa's presentation, and she'll be creating a course for her researchers about using EOSC portal, and we've agreed that we'll try to include that in the EOSC Future course as well when it's available. So that was really
great.
Useful.
Great to hear. Yes, I was inspired by Milita's presentation as well. Any others, Louise or Kim?
Sure. So we had an interesting discussion about kind of the levels that you'd be training on, and how you can be providing courses that are more generally about EOSC and about certain aspects of EOSC like GDPR, or you could be specifically integrating certain elements of EOSC into the training. And the recognition is that if you're integrating elements into the training, that you don't necessarily need to get your audience to understand the huge over meta structure of EOS, that you can very effectively integrate elements like services into training without having to feel the obligation to present, the grand structure of EOS. So I thought it was very interesting thinking about the different levels and the different audiences.
Yeah, I agree about that one, certainly. Kim, any final points? Or
I think we had similar thoughts to the other work groups, especially when you work in a field that is very broad, such as RDM in general. How do you take the EOSC and incorporate it into your existing training? And that's where the resources that we've shared this week and will become available on the wiki shortly can really come in handy. All of our presentations are CC BY, so you can adapt and use them as you wish. And also looking to the portal and thinking about things like a test case for a data set if you're a repository and things like that. So I think the tools that Luis also mentioned yesterday in the ethics and legal workshop, are also a great tool that we can use there. So if you weren't at that session, you can refer back to the materials, and Luis has linked several resources that can be used for interactive training.
yeah, and giving ideas on how they can be used as well, which I thought was great. Irina, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that EOSC signature courses are also very useful, and they'll be reused in the training. Just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I created that. I was part of the team anyway. Okay, thanks. We're just a minute over, which is not bad going. So propose we just take 5-minute break. If we can come back at just 5 past the hour, and we'll move on to the next session. Great. Okay, we'll move on. The next part of the session is fairly short. We're going to just recap a range of existing resources that you can then use in your training. Obviously, we've looked at what your aims, your audience, your learning outcomes, and started to think about the resources that you will use. And obviously, you've been introduced to a lot this week. But before we go into sort of hearing about more places to look, just want to think about what it is you think about when you're looking for training resources. So how do you evaluate training resources, and what criteria you might use? So there is a Menti there, and Pascal will hopefully be lining that one up for you to start using. And I will stop sharing while you're answering the question, so Pascal can share her screen with the results. So this could be for when you're looking for any training, or particularly what you're looking for with EOSC training resources or learning resources. Looking for infographics, that's great. Brilliant. Yeah, so not only text, images, graphics, charts, that's coming across quite strongly already. Available under open license, indeed. A trusted source. The data versioning, yeah, obviously with anything to do with technology, it's useful to know how up to date it is. Good use case. I think certainly for EOS, because we found this week, that's really what brings it alive and makes it understandable when you really see how it can be used. Easy for audience to understand. Quality. Editable. Yeah. Obviously, if you're a trainer, you want to be able to change it. A clear sense of the learning outcomes. Yeah. What is going to be achieved? That helps you choose whether it matches what you want from your courses. Okay, well, we'll leave that going for a few minutes, but Pascal, if you can just stop sharing and I'll go back into my presentation. Thank you. So we've thought briefly there about what you're looking for in terms of selection criteria. Some of these may just be things that you are instinctive, but you may also be selecting for a catalogue or something more formal where you want to be able to show the selection criteria that you've actually used. And again, just wanted to highlight a piece of work that's been going on within EOSC Future with contributions from the broader training community, which is to create a set of quality assurance criteria and for learning resources, and these could be for you as a content provider, but also for you as, you know, if you're going to gather together existing resources and share them. So we have a draft available which you can take a look at, and there's a sample on the slide there, but the full version will be available shortly. Irina, did you want to say anything about when it'll be available? Or
Yes, the version that I showed in the chat is a final version that will upload on Zoom.
Great. So
yeah, it's just a matter of days, really.
Okay.
We're still missing one ORCID ID from one of the OSs, but I guess we'll just carry on without that ORCID ID.
Oh, okay.
So otherwise, in terms of content, it's finalized.
So again, it's a resource that we're using within EOSC, but hopefully you might find it useful as well for your own contexts. So, as you know, in terms of what we're trying to do in EOSC Future, it's to train both the users and providers. And as part of that, we'll be establishing a knowledge hub. And I'm aware that this has been covered in some of the sessions earlier this week, but I'll just do a brief recap because it's particularly relevant, obviously, for this session today, where we're looking for training resources and learning resources. So the idea with the EOSC Knowledge Hub is to build a network of expert trainers and a catalogue to support those trainers. So the catalogue will gather together existing materials, but also provide a place to create new materials. So in terms of the EOSC Knowledge Hub, what is it? Well, it's made up of two main components. One is a learning resource catalogue, and the other is a learning platform that can host the courses and materials. So it's a community resource, and it does have things broader than just EOSC Future. So it is an EOSC resource, and it is, as Irina mentioned earlier, sort of aimed at the principal actor group. So we'll have learning paths throughout the resources, depending on the actor group. There will be a separate landing page coming shortly, and more courses being developed, as you know. But essentially, the Learning Hub was made up of two separate components, which one is the resource catalogue, as I said, and the learning platform. So I'll just show you a little bit more detail about those. So in terms of the EOSC portal, that is where you go to access the training material catalogue. So there is a separate filter which allows you to access training materials, and some of you will have been using that earlier on this week. So that can be all different types of materials. It could be just a single resource, or it could be a course, or it could be a whole service devoted to training. We also have underpinning the Knowledge Hub a resource called Open Plato, which is an open air service, and this has been developed as a free-to-use Moodle-based open resource for the community. It's available for learners to find material, and also for trainers, again, to find their own material and share their own material. It has a mix of pre-existing material that's moving from other platforms, such as previous EOSC projects and things like the Foster project, but also we're creating new materials there as well. And this is where the material from the EOS Knowledge Hub, the EOS Knowledge Hub will be hosted in terms of the courses. And just to clarify the workflow in a little bit more detail, so the idea is that you could start with the training catalogue, find out about a particular course that will be hosted on the Open Plato platform. And then, as I say, you can access the course directly, such as the sort of demonstration course we have on EOSC in a nutshell. So that's how the platforms work together. The long-term goal is that many of the existing platforms within EOSC and existing training catalogues will you'll be able to access the resources through a single point in the EOSC Knowledge Hub. We're not quite there yet, but we are working with other existing catalogues to look at harvesting and integrating their resources. The idea here is very like the EOSC system of systems idea. We're not aiming to create a central catalogue, but we're aiming to create a central place that you can access the resources in a range of different catalogues. So I've pulled together just a selection. There are many more, but this is just a selection of some catalogues that you might want to check out to find resources. And again, these were listed in the notes document of the previous activity. So we have just some things on general open science, some thematic resources such as life science through Elixir, social science and humanities through the SHOCK portal. And there are also a series of regional platforms, training catalogues created, such as NIFOS, EOSC Nordic, EOSC Synergy. So these may be relevant to you depending on your discipline and the region that you come from, but so please do feel free to go directly to these resources and find EOSC related material. But also do bear in mind that at some point in the future, we hope that the materials, the relevant materials in these resources will also be available via the Knowledge Hub. So, I don't know.
Helen?
Yeah, there's a question, I think, in the chat. So does somebody want to answer that one?
I guess so Venkat has answered you, Elizabeth. Not yet, but very soon.
Yeah. If you are interested in asking any questions, then Venkat is on the call, and he's certainly the person to help you with any queries around the development of the Knowledge Hub. But again, as with some things this week, we've got materials for you now, but keep an eye out in the next year for developments. Venkat, you've put your camera on, so does that mean you're going to say something?
No, just preparing myself in case.
Okay, well, if you do have any questions on the Knowledge Hub, please do pop them in the chat, but we'll move on now, I think, to our, I'm going to skip this one for now. We did have another Menti poll on which resources that you might use, but I think a lot of people were putting those into their the discussion notes from the breakouts, so I suggest you please do continue to do that. Alternatively, we can leave the question up until the next Menti question, and you can add to that resource. So what I'm going to do now is move on to the next session and hand over to Pascal, who will be talking about producing fair EOSC training materials.
Yes, thanks. And yes, the Menti is also up, but so, in the meantime, I'll share my screen and I will say something about producing fair training materials. And okay, let me know if anything is as usual, anything is wrong. As I said to my breakout room earlier, we have building work here. So if at some point you suddenly can't hear me, do let me know. It's quiet at the moment. Let's see. So fair EOSC training materials. So I think everyone here knows about FAIR, knows about open science, but yes, and if you were there yesterday and also earlier this week, but you've heard Louise talking yesterday about how EOSC is fair by design. I think since the FAIR principles were published, so in 2016, not that long ago, they have really gained a lot of acceptance. They're used a lot, although it's also still very much evolving. I think attention often goes to research and data, making those fair, of course, not only, but it does seem often a focus. But I think as trainers in open science and FAIR and EOSC, it's of course extra important to practice what we preach and make our training materials also fair and, if possible, open. Why would we do this? Again, I think this is something you're probably all very open to and possibly already doing. But I think if we all make our training materials open, if possible, but at least fair, then we can, well, others like you, so be making our training materials available that we're using now, so you can use them or use them just as inspiration, but also actually use them, reducing time and effort of making your own materials, right? And for yourself, it can be very nice to have a record. So for long-term sustainability, to have it somewhere, as well as recognition, and of course for the trainees, so they can find resources easily. So just summing this up a bit, to contribution to sustainability, also as a way of long-term curation, and we can put into enriching future community policies and governments. And this is, by the way, from a document which I will show you in a few slides. It's maybe also worth thinking about why not just, except for things like GDPR and so on, which is for training materials often not such an issue, but of course it could be. But the main thing that sometimes training materials can be income generating, or training can be income generating for institutions, and this may include your institution. So there's a balance sometimes to be made there. So just, yeah, something to think about. I don't have the right answer necessarily. So you've seen, you probably already know, but you've seen also this week, there are a lot of training resources available, and Helen has just shown you existing resources and some of the existing catalog listing existing resources, and of course the Knowledge Hub, and as well as the training catalog in EOSC will also be useful resources very soon. It can be difficult to find what you need, and this is, there can be, and not so much in the resources that we've shown, but there can be a lack of standardization. There's often a large diversity of what sort of repositories are used. The materials don't always contain metadata, let alone standardized metadata, and therefore it can be difficult to find. So there is this nice paper which shows how this can be improved. And basically this is by making training materials fair. And I think this image nicely sums up, so this is their image, what they said. So this is a paper which you might have seen because it was published in 2020, and it's 10 simple rules for making training materials fair. And I really like it. I think it's very useful, a useful overview. So I'm going to highlight some of these points. So firstly, of course, and it's also here at the center, you can see that they're sharing or planning to share if you don't already have training materials, or if you haven't already shared them. An example here is of training we did with DANS earlier this month. And so just as an example, Zenodo, which I think is very well known with you, also for publications, but can also be used for training materials, and many other ways, of course. And Zenodo is, I think, already onboarded in EOSC, so you can find resources in EOSC, although I'll say a bit more, because of course they will show up as a sort of publication if that's the only thing you do. One of the other things which you will know from the general FAIR principles, of course, give the materials a unique identity or identifier. If we continue with this example from Zenodo, it gets assigned in DOI. And the other arrows pointing at the ORCID ideas of the people that made this training. So there you get also the nice recognition. So I contributed to this, and I found it very nice to see, even though I couldn't be at the training, my name is on top of there, and it's sort of nice, right? But the main thing was, of course, against link rods, not because it's nice. There are other things. So these are the numbers are referring to the numbers of the rules for in the paper. So important to define who can access your training materials and to ideally make them reusable. So on Zenodo, you can indicate a license, and we've also put it here on the training materials themselves. So it's very clear. In this case, it can be used by citing. So CC by. So things that are maybe, you find quite straightforward, but I think it's nice to think about and to remember to do it, because I sometimes have it myself that I think, oh yes, I should actually put the license on there so people know. Then I mentioned, so continuing with the example, if you would put training materials in Zenodo, so for example, slides, but it can be other things. It's also, it's basically a publication, right? But you also want people to be able to find the material, to find the correct material as training material. And therefore it's also important to register training materials in an online registry. So depending on the topic of your training, of course, for EOSC, it will be the EOSC training catalog will be great to have your materials in. But for example, if you would be training specifically on EOSC in the life sciences, a more discipline specific portal like the test of Elixir, of the Elixir cluster is or project is more relevant, which then again is also will be showing up in the EOSC training catalog as well. So you wouldn't have to do that twice. So some of these other rules are to make your training materials fair, are to properly describe your materials so people can find them, and to make your training materials reusable and usable for trainers and usable for trainees. And the way to do this is through metadata. So you probably know metadata from research data sets and so on. But also for training materials, this is important to because it makes it, if you use structured or standardized metadata, it makes materials human as well as machine readable, and therefore they can be findable and retrievable, right, in the same way as for data sets. It helps with sustainability in the sense that metadata can continue to exist in a registry even if the link would be broken for some reason or something else happens to the actual place where the training resource is held. And by adding key information like information on the licenses, but also on learning outcomes or prerequisites to attend the training or the target audience, if you add these to these metadata, especially if you do this using standardized or controlled vocabulary, you increase the usability for trainers and trainees alike, and also the reusability, right, with the licenses. I already mentioned that. And if I mentioned the controlled vocabularies, but if these are used and if metadata standards are followed, this helps also with interoperability, so that, for example, the EOS training catalog can easily talk to the TESS Elixir catalog, right? This example, a much used metadata scheme for training materials is the RDA Minimal Metadata for Learning Resources, published earlier this year, but already in use in many of these catalogs that Helen, for example, showed. Because this might be, depending on your screen, might or might not be very well visible. I also typed them here. So in these same groups, so these are the groups of descriptive information, access information, and educational information. So you can see here what should be ideally the minimal set of metadata. Of course, you can add more, but this should really be there. Ideally, of course, the world is not always ideal. And in the EOS training catalog, the metadata that are required, they're very much based on these RDA minimal metadata for learning resources, almost the same 14 fields, except that access cost, you see there is access rights. And that's just a bit broader because there's not necessarily a cost involved, but you might still have to register, for example. The main difference is that not all are mandatory, because you have to make this balance between wanting to have useful materials there, but the metadata not necessarily being available. And this is well, also something that I'd be interested to know what you think about this. Sorry, it moved, that one thing moved a bit there, but because especially for existing materials that might already be, that are already available, they exist now, but they might not necessarily have metadata or much metadata attached to it, and the people that originally made them, the authors, might not be available anymore. We have, there are a lot of people, maybe postdocs or postgraduate students or contractors or people that used to work on a project but have now moved on to the next project. They might not be available anymore to add these metadata, and it might not be possible to do this, but we might still want this. And therefore, only for existing resources, at least in the EOS training catalog, only 3 of these fields are absolutely required to onboard this, make a link to this resource. And just here, a little bit of the EOS training catalog, which you've seen probably already, at least the sort of the test version that's up now. And just to show how controlled vocabularies are, of course, important for interoperability between these training catalogs, but also for easy filtering. So you could here click on beginner or intermediate, or of course higher levels, and easily find your data. And this is another example of I mentioned this one before, the basically EOS training portal tests. With the link there if you want to look for yourself. And this is just one example of how they have metadata, for example, keywords with a controlled vocabulary. So it's easy to find. In this case, this is training about data documentation and metadata. With also other things like the target audience and the resource type. So this is a presentation. So you can, as a trainer, you could easily find the kind of resource that you want. And just one more example, the license here. So you know that you can, in this case, reuse it with CC by a share-alike license. This is the screenshot of this, the training catalog that you know well by now. But just to point out that here, these different metadata fields can be used for filtering and lead you to a resource, in this case, an existing resource. So it doesn't have all the metadata, but it does have quite a few. So it helps you to find the right resource. So just back to these 10 rules. And this is just, it's a useful list. It's not necessarily, you can address this in different ways, right? I just find it's a useful way of thinking about it. But as we said, to describe it properly, I mean, sharing is clear, I think, but describe it properly, you can use structured, standardized metadata to give a unique identity, the TOIs, ORCIDs, and so on. To register online in training catalogs. The 5th one is to define access rules, so you can use licenses, make clear what the access rights are and how this can be done. What I haven't mentioned, but which I will come back to in the Menti that we will do in a moment, is the using of an interoperable format. And I think this also speaks sort of for itself. It's important to remember, though, to use something that is open, as well as editable, as well as easy to learn, if possible. And the seventh one, to make it reusable, to make your materials reusable and usable for trainings by adding that license, by adding the metadata so people can find it, as well as for trainees. And again, the correct metadata helps here. Then welcome contributions is one that I found quite interesting. So if you add rules for participation and contribution, for example, to your training materials, other people could well, work on that as well. So you could either just put it somewhere and say, okay, people can reuse this and do what they will, but you can also make it more, the contribution more active. And then finally, keeping materials up to date. It's important at least to use timestamps or versioning and indicate that. So you've seen that in the metadata schema, that this is one of the things, the version. And if you think, for example, about the training on the EOSC portal that you might have followed on Tuesday, and the EOSC portal looked probably a bit different last year. So if there was any training then, it would be slightly different, and it's still in progress. So if you would have any training next year, again, it would look different. And this would be important to know, right, which version you would be training on. So there are also some challenges remaining, and this is also to highlight that there is the community of practice, which Helen will mention this, and which has been mentioned before this week. The open air community of practice is a working group there is working on this document, which I think will be out soon, which is really interesting, but where they talking much more about this. And what's interesting is well, I just want to share the sort of remaining things that are challenging to the verification of training materials. And it can be the sort of hesitance of sharing and adopting training material. And a solution here could be, and maybe you also have ideas, but what could be is help is a robust and transparent and a widely adopted system of accreditation and recognition, for example, for trainers and resources. So for example, the Elixir have a certification working group who are working on training resource certification. So that could be one way of addressing this. Another thing is selecting and getting consensus on the metadata standards. So which one do you use? These RDA ones that I've shown are now widely used, but it's, of course, it helps if they're the same and you don't get more and more different ones. And one that will be familiar to many of you is ensuring funding and therefore sustainability and quality assurance. You've already been shown this document, right, by Helen and Irina on that, so I'm not going to go into that further, but just to highlight a few things to think about. And here are some key resources, because the slides will be shared, so you can have a look yourself at these various resources. And I want to add one more thing, because I think we haven't really talked about it very much today. It has come up earlier this week. It's a different kind of accessibility. When you're thinking about creating training materials, maybe also think about creating inclusive training content. And the EOSC Synergy Training Handbook, which has been mentioned before, is a very useful resource here, and there's a link there. For now, I would like your input again a bit more, and we'll go to the Menti. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and share the Menti instead. So it's the same link, and I'll just go to the next question. There we go. This one is a quiz one. It's the only quiz one. The rest will be more general, but I thought I'd try it. And so it's define if your training materials are open or restricted. Which aspect of fair is this? So I thought I'd start with, well, I think it's a straightforward one, but just so we get into it a bit. And it's counting down. I hope you have enough time. So maybe you didn't have enough time, sorry about that. I found it difficult to know how much time to give you for this. And is accessibility is the correct answer. I can see the reusability, because in a sense, if they're open, then they're reusable. So I think actually that's also fine. But this was just to get into it a bit. And but now more so, how can you improve human and machine findability of your training materials? This one is not timed, so you can take your time to read through this. And there are multiple answers. You should be able to click on multiple ones, which are correct or not. So is it by adding standardized metadata, by adding descriptive text, by adding standardized keywords, by using an open format, by adding a license, and or by adding materials or metadata to a registry. So this is specifically talking about findability. Waiting a little bit for, let's see if more people will respond. There's also some things in the chat I'm just seeing now. Thanks, Marina, for the additions. Yes, and I think it's already becoming clear. So indeed, by adding standardized metadata, I think that's clear why that is, so you can find the right thing. By adding standardized keywords, which is actually part of sort of the same thing, right? But yeah, so it's keywords as metadata, but when they're standardized, it's also easier to find. By adding your materials and metadata to a registry, that then also helps to find them, because if you're looking in that registry, people can actually see your training rather than if it's somewhere online, but it might show up in Google, but it might not, right? So by adding the materials metadata to a registry, that then helps. The others are a bit more so by adding a descriptive text. I specifically put machine findability. So I think that it's important to add a descriptive text, so people, once they find the training, they can see what it is, and it does help, but not so much for machines, but more for humans, right? And open formats and licenses are, I think, mostly important for reusability and maybe less so for the findability. But it's not a quick. So you see a text. Descriptive text is part of a definition of findability. Yeah, so this is actually quite interesting. I'm quite interest myself in the machine readability and how this works. But in many cases, if you have like a registry, I think it doesn't, so the descriptive text, so Google, for example, is very good at this, but not all registries and training catalogs are very good at picking up in sort of the free text in terms of machines. So, but I don't think it's necessarily a wrong answer or something. It's more that thinking of machines, I think it's important not just add descriptive text, but also add, for example, these standardized keywords. So you're covering everything basically. But yeah, thanks for that. So the next one, it's a ranking one. So how would you rank these training material formats for interoperability? Actually, unless someone else wanted to say something about the last one, that's also fine. You can just, I can't see you, so if you just want to speak up, that's fine, by the way, just to let you know. But anyway, if you want, you can continue with this one. So how would you rank these training material formats for interoperability specifically? And again, I don't think there's one good answer here. But while you're thinking about that, I'll just read what Armin has written. Yeah, so you want to say a bit more about that, Armin? And you're welcome to also to talk. It's fine to just if you prefer to put it in the chat, but if you want to.
Yeah, I'm just going on about this because under the FAIR concept was developed for data sharing. So, and of course, now we're talking about training materials, which is different again. But if we look at the original definition of what FAIR, what it stands for, under findable, it's very clear that it needs to have a human readable textual description. And that is one of the definition under FAIR, that needs to be there. And the reason for that is that Google can't index something inside like a data sheet. So it relies on this being there. So we can now think about how much of that also applies to training material, which will have plenty of textual things that a search engine can grab onto. And then we need to think about maybe FAIR needs to mean something different for training materials than for data. But if we take the original definition, then textual description is one of the key things that need to be there under findability.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think it's a really good point, and thanks for clarifying that. And I see what you're meaning, because I think definitely, I think it's different interesting aspects here. I think it's very important, and I think that's also the reason why, for example, in the EOS training catalog, it's also one of the metadata in the RDA that you have this description or abstract or of the training material in there, to have this human aspect. I think it's also important for the training materials as well as for the research data to have your to also have those more standardized keywords so that the machines can also read it, so that you have both. But it's definitely important not to forget to add that. Or not to avoid adding that. I think, I don't know if someone else has some input there that I would like to share.
Just to say, I mean, Irina's already posted the link in the chat, but the same group that developed the 10 simple steps at Elixir are also developing a series of lessons, sort of more in-depth lessons about how to apply these steps, because while the article is really good, it actually doesn't give, in some areas, real practical steps about how you can actually apply them. So look out for these lessons that will be coming out soon, and I think they do explore more the difference between, Simon said that it's not straightforward just to apply the principles from data to training materials. There are important differences to take account of.
Yeah, it's good to see that they're almost out, and that because it's and as the point that Armin also made is really good. I think really good point that it is different, and it's good to think about that, how to apply it. So thanks, and I'm looking forward to that resource actually.
Pascal, can I ask another question in relation to what you showed before, that it would be important to have standardized keywords? Again, in relation to data, we have many kind of, thesauruses, how to describe certain research fields. But I'm wondering if we have something, the level of training, and if we would like to have more standardized keywords for what is being developed in relation to EOS Open Science, that we might propose a thesaurus. I'm not certain if anyone has a kind of a link or ideas how to proceed here.
Yes, indeed. Kim says it sounds like a question for a community of practice, and I think that's actually something that's important to develop. I know other people here know more about this than I, but for the EOS training catalog, a vocabulary has been set up. I don't know exactly if that was then also based on an existing thing, or if this, I think except for the RDA glossaries or data dictionaries. So they exist, so that same RDA, minimal metadata for learning resources. They also had some data dictionaries, which I think then was used for the EOS training catalog as well. But by the way, I can't see hands or anything at the moment. So if anyone thinks like
Irina Kuchma,
Yeah, I think it would also be important to think about multilingual keywords, because I think all of us are dealing with researchers who speak in more than one language and would need training materials in more than one language, and maybe linking with Wikidata is a good approach. But I agree that would be a cool project for the community of practice. Let's suggest it.
Yes, I would like to take part. And yes, I think that the languages are really important as well. And then also for, these vocabularies or other thesauri to be available in different languages again, and the training materials themselves as well. And in interest of time, and already also I saw that Irene had mentioned the training material formats. So I'd like to go back to those. And as I said, this is more like something to think about in a discussion, and I don't have the correct answer. I know that the paper, the 10 rules paper, has certain preferences, but as Irina said, I think as many formats as possible is a really good one, because that's of course a solution to this. From the table, there's Google Slides is the winner followed by your answers, that is, followed by PPTX, so PowerPoint, but then PPTX one, PDF, then Markdown and Keynote. I think we can all agree on Keynote that it's not very interoperable because it's for Macs, so it's not open. And for the other ones, it's more complex, I think. So Google Slides is an interesting one compared to PowerPoint, because PowerPoint or PPTX at least is compatible with open formats. And Google Slides requires an internet connection, and Google is not available in all countries. I think in the EU or Europe it probably is, but if you're looking outside this, and it's something that came back yesterday in the legal and ethics talk, that how does this work for communities outside of Europe? So I mean, that's a good point. Ease of use, I think, is important. So so these different aspects. And also, I'm not sure what is the correct answer. I would say Google Slides is often like within, if you're working with other people and thinking about EOS sort of in Europe, it works everywhere. But thinking beyond there, you have other things. So there's something to. Armin, please go ahead. I did see your hand this time.
Yeah. So I think two different concepts collide here. With ease of use, Google Slides, PowerPoint, and so on, we can use that, and that's what's attractive, and that's a good thing. However, if I think about interoperability, then the definition is, how can I make things comparable and mesh things together? That's what interoperability is about. So a lightweight open source format like Markdown would score much higher in this area than PPTX or Google Slides. However, I doubt very much that Markdown is easy to use. So I would say interoperable, yes. Ease of use, no for Markdown.
Yeah, that's good. And Helen makes a good point here, where interoperability is being interpreted slightly differently for training materials. So if you think about how can you make your training materials interoperable, so with other people, then be thinking about ease of use. Also, it's important your definition as well. I think so. What are the three things? So I think open is important, but also editable can be important. So PDFs is very good, as you all mentioned here. They're preferred file format, they're good for archiving, but you can't edit them. You would have to sort of, you can use them and maybe copy text, but they're not directly editable. So there's the different aspects to training materials, which is why I put this question on, because I think it's important to think about it. And as Irina said, there's not necessarily one format, because PDF is great because it's good for archiving, and maybe if you have a certain exercise, but then the next trainer can't edit it, and the various other formats. And Markdown, as you mentioned, I mean, it would be very good in certain sense, but it's quite it's a bit of a learning curve for people to know how to use that. So that's in that sense not ideal.
Yeah, there's lots of discussion. This one's provoked, which is great. But I think I mean, certainly the approach I've been taking is to make materials, as Irina said, in different formats. So we're creating Moodle courses, for example, but also making the individual assets that make up that Moodle course, along with things like scripts and the text that's available in different formats. So is that the last question then, Pascal?
I think that we can stop whenever it's time to stop, because the main thing of these is just to to think about these things for training materials, for training materials in contrast to data, for example. So this is the last one. If we have time, but we can stop whenever.
No, we're fine.
Okay. In that case, we have, how can you make your training materials more usable for trainees? So this is again another aspect. So I think all these, the various things that are maybe all good to do in general for FAIR, but so I've been teasing out the different aspects just to help us think a bit about what's useful and in what way. And by the way, PDF plus PowerPoint, both of them, I think it's a very good way forward, or the open format of PowerPoint ODF. And really good to see the discussion in the chat also continue. I think it is really useful to think about these things. And yes, I think with FAIR, we're very much also, it's generally accepted, but we're also still in the process of thinking of how to apply all these things, right? So more usable. So the learning outcomes in the metadata, I think, are indeed important, as well as the target audience, as well as the prerequisites. It's not scoring very highly, but I would argue that it's also helpful. So if you say that it's basically maybe the level, it's sort of maybe, yeah, if you have multiple of these, but the more you have, the more specific you can make it. It depends a bit on the type of training as well. But to know it, do you already need to know what FAIR is if you start to follow this training, or is it more basic, right? The license, yeah, it's mostly, I think, important for trainers as well, so they can reuse it. And for the trainees, perhaps it's, if they just want to use it and not reuse, then it's maybe less important, but in general, it can't hurt, right? And the contribution files, I would say, is also more maybe for the trainers important rather than the trainees. Although, on the other hand, a feedback mechanism for trainees would be very helpful. And Irina asked, is anyone using reusable non-proprietary formats for slide sharing?
Yeah, I use LibreOffice for documents, but I don't really use for presentations, and I don't even know if there is an equivalent.
There is an equivalent. OpenOffice has an equivalent, and it's very actually user-friendly, and it very much looks like PowerPoint. It's called OpenOffice Impress. It's free, it's open source, and the format is open, and it's fully compatible with PowerPoint and Google Slides. And you can also export from Google Slides in this is ODP format. So I've started recently using this format because there is absolutely no reason why I should prefer PowerPoint format when, I mean, in terms of value and functionalities, there are no advantages on the side of PowerPoint.
I think LibreOffice has an Impress as well. I guess that's the name. Thanks.
Yeah, Libre is also another one, which is also, and I haven't tried it, but I think it's also supposed to be quite user-friendly.
That's great discussion. I think we're going to have to bring it to a close, if that's all right. We just got a few minutes to wrap up. Just bear with me. So, thank you very much, everyone, for attending this week. As I say, this is the last session of the full week, and in terms of next steps, as you know, we will be providing more training for different audiences. some of it is already in progress. We have some providers training coming up very shortly. And as Venkat mentioned in the chat earlier, we have got self-paced versions of the course this week coming soon. And we will be planned to repeat this course. But Kim, is there anything else you'd like to say just to wrap up this week?
Yeah, just briefly, thank you all for attending, whether you were able to attend just today or you attended all 4 or some combination. So you will receive an email either Friday or Monday that has 2 things, and it's a link to our survey. We would love if you could fill it out and give us some feedback. And the second, we are going to be adding the materials to the wiki that will include all the slides. It will include the recordings of the sessions, as well as any additional materials that we showed, such as the video that was played on day 1. So once that is all on the wiki, we will clear that, send you an email about it. So keep an eye on your inbox. And if it went to your spam, check your spam folder next week. Or you can just set a reminder to check the wiki sometime next week, and it will all be there. And we really encourage reuse of the materials where you find it appropriate. And thanks.
Okay. The final thing that I just want to mention is the community of practice, which is an open science training coordinators community of practice, which was originally set up by OpenAir in 2018, but it's a community-driven practice, and really it's there for, I guess, support after today. If anybody wants to join that community, it doesn't just focus on EOSC, it focuses on all aspects of open science training, but we do have a separate sort of subgroup talking about EOSC if you want to be involved in that. So please do consider joining that. You can just drop me an email or Venkat, or just have a look at the contact details on the webpage that Irina has posted in the chat. But I think that is it for the end of the session. So I'd just like to say thank you very much. And we hope to see you on other training in future.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, Kyle. Bye. Thanks, Armin.